Okay, Isaac, firstly, a warm welcome to you on filmeshilmy.com. It's so wonderful to have you, so thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Anush.
Look, Twisters is a very unlikely common film for you. And I say that because despite it being a sequel and, of course, a disaster film of this level and scale, the loss of innocence, coming of age themes are so visceral, and we've seen that in your previous works as well. So how do you, as a filmmaker, balance the sort of your voice as a storyteller as well as the commerciality of a product like this?
I think it's still a story about people. At the end of the day, any story of any scale still needs to be about people. And when I read this script that Mark L. Smith had written, I felt I felt myself identifying a lot with Kate, Daisy Edgar-Jones's character. So once I had that anchor in mind, there were so many things within the script and the direction of this thing that I wanted to show her journey in a way that was personal to me. So I felt like that personal connection is there. And then all the other stuff, the cars doing massive stunts and all that stuff that's happening, that's all coming from my personal joy as well, stuff that I just love doing, that I find exhilarating and fun. So all of it is still very much me and something that I've just been longing to do.
Yeah. Right. Of course, no, look, I mean, the shoot, I believe, took place in rural Oklahoma. And there was also likelihoods at that time of storms happening and, there were very VFX-heavy scenes that you were in a rush to complete as well. And it was amazing to hear about that journey because I've read the production notes about that. But I think when capturing the tornadoes on screen, a bit of a profound question, but how did, sort of capturing those on screen actually make you internalize on the storms we face as human beings when it comes to emotions and dealing with people on a regular basis?
Yeah, tornadoes are honestly such an apt metaphor for many of the things that we encounter. And I would often say that this movie itself feels like a tornado, or the process of working on it felt like I was chasing a massive tornado, or I was facing off against a big tornado. I really loved that about this film, that I was able to play within that space of that metaphor in a way. And at the same time to study this mysterious thing of nature that is much bigger than us, a thing that I find to be incredibly cinematic.
Right.
I love the texture that it provides in the story.
But the interesting thing is, because I've seen the film, and the tornadoes are not just a monster. It's not just an antagonist. Of course, the looming sinister presence is always there, but we see it almost becoming spiritual at times. There's times when it almost is humanized. But I think that's what the fascinating part is, because, do you ever feel as a filmmaker when you're capturing VFX, which is obviously driven by machines, it's not a human thing, right? Do you ever feel like this sort of dichotomy between humanizing something that is almost driven by machines, so to speak, as a filmmaker?
Yeah, what I find really interesting about tornadoes is that there's still mystery at the heart of them. Scientists have still not figured out the way in which a vortex descends from the mesocyclone to the Earth, or how that connection happens, if it's from the Earth up, or where that is happening and why. And I found that to be really a beautiful way to think about all of this within the film. I never felt like we are trying to perfectly replicate what is happening in nature in a very machine-like way, but instead there's an expressiveness to that. Anywhere that there is mystery, there's always an artistic expression, I feel, that can be done.
Indeed.
And that goes even into humanity and what people are going through, their emotions, all of those things. So what was important for me in these tornadoes was to preserve that in an expressionistic way, and also to give them some kind of interesting voice as well. And our guy at Skywalker, Al Nelson, who designed the sound of the tornadoes, I mean, he used very interesting sounds within the tornado to make sure that tornadoes themselves have an individualized voice. So he had sounds of wolves howling that he played with the speed of that sound, and other animal sounds and things that would provide some organic texture to them, that it's not just machine processed.
It's so fascinating, and honestly, I think when people see it on the big screen, they'll definitely be able to appreciate all of that. But I think largely speaking about the industry as a whole and the sort of phase we're in terms of cinema, there's been a plethora of dystopian and disaster films that have released recently. I mean, Warner had Dune 2, which performed extraordinarily well at the box office. In India, we had a film called Kalki, which has minted so much money, and it's really sort of rooted in spirituality. But I think for you as a filmmaker, as someone who has been in this business for a while, how difficult is it to gauge why such films are being made, and to what extent does calamity, become a sellable commodity, especially in this sort of era that we're living in?
Yeah, I never know why things are happening. I always think about it in terms of what I'm personally drawn to as a filmmaker. And then I noticed that other filmmakers are being drawn to similar topics. Minari in itself was somewhat like a disaster movie. It kind of ends with this massive fire that ends up bringing a family together. It's a disaster that brings people together. And with Twisters, it was interesting that I found I wanted to continue that thread of this massive fire. But in this case, it's with tornadoes. And that was just a personal draw that I have. Whether or not that's commercial or not, I wasn't really thinking too much about, and whether audiences are looking for this sort of thing. I kind of allowed the studios to make that decision, and whether or not they're going to greenlight this picture. But my goal as an artist was just to work within what I found interesting, what I was being drawn to.
Sure, and I think that's all very well good, but I think we are living in obviously very unpredictable times as well. So I think for you as a filmmaker, I think this is very apt for Twisters as well, because how difficult is it for you not to allow external factors to impact your storytelling as well? I mean, is there ever, I mentioned dichotomy earlier, do you ever feel that as well as an artist when you're sort of projecting the stories that you do? Because they're very human interest, strong emotional stories.
I try to let things from the outside trickle in and invade what I'm doing, and I feel like the role of film is to really try to capture what's happening in the present day, and to capture something new each time. So with this film, we were filming during tornado season in Tornado Alley. Yep. We were getting rocked by the real world constantly. And in some ways, I jokingly complain about that a lot, and I complained about it a lot on set. But it was that process that I found to be really enlivening. Like, I found that to be really good for the movie itself, to have the clouds that we were having, and to have this sense of all of us coming together to try to make this movie in very difficult conditions. All of those things, I think, are important for the process.
Indeed. Now, I think on a final sort of note, films under the Warner Brothers banner have always stricken a chord with me, because I really have resonated with what they're trying to say. I mean, if we look at the sort of films that they've had, the trajectory, they've always championed what we call the underdog story, wherein an ordinary character is suddenly plunged into a whirlwind, quite literally here as well, of extraordinary circumstances. And I think also even in Minari, and then even in Twisters, where even spirituality in a subtle way is a very subliminal theme as well. I think even, like I said, Twisters also embodies that whole idea of, underdog spirit, in some way too. So how much of Warner Brothers' ethos do you resonate with, particularly when it comes to being an underdog?
Yeah, I've kind of just generally felt the team at Warner Brothers, they're really earthy people. They're very human. I really love all of them. And we had the fortunate circumstance with this one where we're working with Warner on the international side of distribution, and Universal was guiding our domestic process. And then Amblin with Steven Spielberg is kind of at the heart of that. And I just found that everybody was on board to try to make this a very human story. We all felt like this film is, it's kind of different from a superhero movie, because we don't have people with extraordinary powers. They're human beings, they're scientists, and they're facing something very extraordinary that's happening in the real world. We really are dealing with a lot of tornado outbreaks. So that opportunity for us as a team, we were able to lean into that sense of humanity, the underdog story, all of those things. it was a great way to work. But I think it always starts with the people rather than the corporation, if that makes sense.
True.
And that's kind of where I always put my focus.
Absolutely. Well, may you continue to present us with such wonderful human interest stories. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Isaac.
Anish.
Thank you.